Dear participants, distinguished panelists, Mr. Minister, warm greetings and welcome on behalf of the International School of Economics at Tbilisi State University. Thank you for your participation in second international policy panel of ISET series of panels reflecting on COVID impact, challenges, and sectoral solutions and opportunities. Today we have participants in Zoom webinar as well as on Facebook, and the numbers of participants will be known in a few minutes because as I see the number is increasing every second. So today we will try to together imagine higher education post-pandemic. Education has been one of the most impacted sector in entire world by the pandemic. Millions of students of schools and universities in 168 countries went from schools to home, adapting to the new reality of lockdown and online learning. The start of pandemic, thousands of higher education institutions, administration staff and academics were very much focused on responding to the short-term disruption caused by pandemic in the educational institutions, from maintaining staff and students' welfare to caring about shutdown of campuses and facilities, most importantly, adapting academic processes online, both teaching and testings and exams. Now that all have adapted to online delivery of educational process, questions have started to emerge on the long-term challenges of the sector. And now that in spring admissions are approaching in a few months, a new academic year is approaching us in the fall, the new questions on the longer-term challenges and solutions are emerging first. How financial, economic, and demographic issues impact demand and enrollment in higher education, on funding of education and educational institutions, on institutional traditions of universities, on academic programs and their quality. Will there be a shift in demand from private to more to public universities? How the pandemic, post-pandemic reality will impact on international mobility, with travel restrictions, with threats to the further waves of the virus coming perhaps later in the year or farther. Will students be able to pursue education in foreign destinations? The recent survey of 11,000 students by QS, the Educational Rankings Agency, has suggested that nearly half the students who were intending to study abroad now plan to defer. So will there be also shifts in global versus local preferences? So these are some of the very big questions, and with this, let me start by introducing our distinguished panel today. I'm very pleased and honored to present the panel of 5 members. Minister Dr. Michael Tchenkeli is the alumni of Tbilisi State University. He has a PhD in mathematics from the University of Pennsylvania. From 2016, when he returned to Georgia, he has had various high-level positions in the education sector, from being vice rector of TSU to a minister of education, and then advisor of the prime minister in education sector, and again, minister of education, science and sports from 2019. Dr. Tchenkeli has been teaching was teaching in US universities for over 20 years. He has received numerous awards for academic and pedagogical activities, including Professor's Oscar for Best Teaching, and 9 awards of University of Pennsylvania for the best teaching. And these are some of the numerous of his professional accomplishments in the education sector. Dr. Dietrich, Karl Dietrich, is the second panelist. He's PhD from European University Institute in Florence, and after teaching in Leiden and Maastricht universities, he had numerous functions in Dutch and European higher education sector. Specifically, he has been president of Maastricht University for 8 years, president of Association of Dutch Universities. He's currently president of ICAR, European Quality Assurance Register for Higher Education. The third participant is Dr. Seibold Noorda. He's President Emeritus of the University of Amsterdam, and he's a former board member of European University Association. He currently chairs the Magna Charta Observatory, which has 889 university signatories from 89 countries. This is an agreement on the principles and the good governance of higher education institutions. He has been a chair and a board member of various prestigious European universities and associations in the education sector. My pleasure to introduce Dr. Georgi Sharvashidze. He is rector of Tbilisi State University, Ivane Javakhishvili Tbilisi State University, which is the largest and oldest university in Caucasus. For last 25, 30 years, he has had various high-level positions in education sector in Georgia and internationally. In 90s, he served as a Deputy Minister of Education. He again served as Deputy Minister of Education in 2016 and 17. For 9 years, he served as a director of academic foundation program in Budapest in Hungary, and he's a member of various prestigious institutions and associations in the education sector. And my pleasure to introduce Sebastian Molineus, who is the World Bank Director for Caucasus since 2019. He has intensive experience in international financial cooperation and the World Bank, from covering IFC's portfolio in Russia and Egypt to being a director of global practice for finance, competitiveness, and institutions in the World Bank. So with this distinguished panel, we will try to reimagine higher education post-pandemic. And with this, let me focus our first round of questions on the challenges of education sector and how each of you, dear panelists, see challenges from where you sit and where you serve. Let me first address the Minister. Minister, we deeply appreciate that you found time in these very busy times to join us today and to share your views and your vision with us. Thank you very much. And with this, as a prime policymaker in education sector in Georgia, let me pass it on to you to talk about the challenges of the sector.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your introduction and for organizing this, I believe, very important event. Thanks to ISET and the ISET leadership for putting the panel together, and for the participants. Of course, this is going to be very interesting and very valuable and useful seminar, Speak Online panel. And indeed, there are quite a lot of challenges, and the situation that the entire world found itself during this pandemic. Humankind has never seen anything like this, including education sector. The challenges for the entire world was absolutely new for every country, and the challenges were indeed quite serious. But everyone in the education sector, including in Georgia, we understood that even though the challenges prohibited us and made it impossible to continue the standard teaching process in classrooms and auditoriums, we all understood that no matter what the challenges are, the process of educating our youngsters, that should not stop. And I am very happy and proud to say that we prevailed, and due to lots of efforts, joint effort by primarily, of course, educators, by leaders of schools, universities, our ministry, our government, with the help of our international friends and partners, we were able to conquer those challenges at every level of education. And we are indeed very proud that the first assessments that we got of our efforts in dealing with these challenges in the direction of fruitfully establishing distance education in Georgia, we got very high praises from OECD. As you know, there was in their report, Georgia was mentioned one of the exemplary countries in the efforts of dealing with these challenges. And very recently, Microsoft Corporation had an online conference dealing with the challenges during the pandemic period and the post-pandemic issues, in which I was a participant. Microsoft invited me to be on the panel, and during that online conference, it was an online summit, Microsoft gave us very high praise of how we introduced technology and how quickly we and effectively managed to establish and introduce distance education and distance learning and distance teaching methods in Georgia. And the head of education directorate of OECD mentioned that Georgia and Finland are the leader countries in establishing distance education effectively during the pandemic period. So we're very proud of that, and I want to underline that the accolades first and foremost go to our teachers and professors. And I want to use this opportunity as well to thank every single one of them from the bottom of my heart for doing enormous work. And they are the true heroes, and they have been on the forefront during these challenges. And just like our doctors, who have indeed every day exhibited acts of heroism, so did our teachers and professors that every day, with their enthusiasm, with their dedication, and with their creative approach, they made sure that students in the secondary education, professional education, as well as the higher education, they got education process continued for them, and this is certainly extremely important, and once again, big thanks and accolades go to them. I want to thank our international partners, and I'm very happy that Sebastian here is with us. I want to point out tremendous assistance that we have gotten from World Bank, and conceptually they were with us practically every day. We had exchanges of information. They were sharing with us the findings of their research, recommendations that came from international organizations, and we were having a very interesting dialogue concerning all levels of education, of course, including the higher education. And of course, their financial assistance is very important. Just before the whole pandemic started, we had a big event when we launched extremely important program that we'll be doing together with the World Bank. The program whose capacity is $102 million. And the primary goal of that, of course, before the pandemic, was infrastructure, secondary education, and higher education. Of course, during the pandemic period and during the post-pandemic time, of course, the main goals are the same, but of course it will be fine-tuned with the new challenges that we face in the post-pandemic period. And we are again very grateful that you will be cooperating with us in that direction. Now, as far as the distance education, and I want to concentrate here on some specifics of how it was done. As soon as the pandemic started, we at the ministry convened the Rectors' Council, in which we already gave the clear recommendations to every university that even though during that period most universities were actually on break, it was spring break time, so the semester hadn't started yet. But we said that let's use this time to launch as a pilot. Let's use the vacation time to launch distance learning and distance education already as a pilot by using various platforms, online platforms that were available. And I want to say that every university acted quickly and efficiently in introducing various different communication platforms, and it was established in a very successful way. Here, once again, I want to underline that this was new for Georgia, even though some professors and some classes used distance learning and the online communication platforms here and there, but systematically this was brand new for Georgia. And once again, we are quite proud of our professors and the university leaderships that it was established quickly and on very high quality. This is very important to underline, that the quality is certainly very important. And every day we are observing this process, and the tools that was used and how the lectures were conducted were all up to the NCA standards. And in that direction, I must say that this was a very significant and important achievement. Now, there was an issue I want to quickly mention when I talk about, from the ministry's point of view, secondary education as well. There we also launched the online platforms. Mainly it was based on the Microsoft 365, specifically Teams, that was very effectively used in that in those endeavors. But one of the challenges that we have in Georgia that we will be working very hard to eradicate is that some students do not have access to internet. And that certainly didn't allow those students to actively get involved in online instruction. So what we did is very quickly, together with cooperation of Channel 1 of Georgia, which is the public broadcaster, we created Teleschool. It's a TV school where the entire format of the secondary education goals, where the lessons were transferred into the TV format, and we recruited some of the best and most experienced teachers. And I must say that the TV school was a success from the launch, and it had the really big accolades from inside Georgia, from the entire population, because I must say that besides the actual students that were supposed to watch the classes, it was very popular among parents and grandparents. They were very eager to, indeed, during the self-isolation time, when there was a campaign to stay at home, for obvious reasons. So the grandparents especially were quite interested to rewatch those classes, and it was quite a success story. And certainly it's continuing, and I believe it's certainly going to definitely stay with us even in post-pandemic period. Every crisis raises opportunities. So there are opportunities to create something new, something that will stay with us, and even during post-pandemic period will make the experience even better. Now, certainly TV school is going to be certainly one of those, and this channel is going to remain like that. The entire channel was reformatted, and now it's called Channel 1 Education, and we will have a dedicated public broadcasting education channel with us, which is certainly a wonderful thing. Now, as far as the post-pandemic, the lessons that were learned during the pandemic period will be very useful, and especially at the higher education level, the development of this whole infrastructure and philosophy of distance learning, I believe, should be used in two major ways. In September, when we return to the traditional system, where university students will go back to the auditoriums, secondary education, high school students will return to classrooms, especially at the university level, the electronic forms and electronic resources should definitely be kept, because the hybrid method of having instructions and lectures in traditional ways, supplemented and complemented by effective use of electronic methods, online methods, and electronic resources, certainly enhances the education process and raises the quality. That's one major direction that should be done internally, and I believe universities will be very successful in that. But the second main area is, I believe the international cooperation should be stronger than ever during this pandemic. And indeed it is, because this pandemic is a global challenge. The entire world faces this challenge. Therefore, in order for us to conquer those challenges, we need to bring our forces together, and this is precisely what happened. Even in post-pandemic period, I believe this very close cooperation between various universities should continue and become even stronger. And certainly the online medium will allow us to do that. We were planning to extend activities like this even before the pandemic started, namely inviting famous professors from various universities around the world to conduct seminars and lectures at our universities in Georgia, and doing and vice versa. Our professors were very happy to provide lectures, especially in Georgian language, Georgian history and culture, for interested students abroad. And I believe in this direction we should enlarge the scope of this type of cooperation. And now that because of the pandemic, everybody is very well versed in online communication, and these formats of delivering online lectures have become basically like an everyday thing, and it's now part of our everyday life. Even post-pandemic, this certainly brings the world together. It brings the world closer, and we certainly should take advantage of that. And I'm absolutely certain that the close ties that Georgian universities already enjoyed with famous leading international universities will become even stronger.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, reflecting on the challenges and also opportunities this crisis has brought to the education sector of Georgia and globally. We have nearly 100 participants in Zoom and over 100 participants on Facebook. And with this, Dr. Dietrich, you are the president of European Quality Assurance Register for Higher Education, and obviously, you know, you've been in the middle of discussions on the challenges of the sector, of universities, students, how to ensure the quality is delivered to students, how to ensure the continuity, how to ensure that the challenge is addressed not only in the short term, but some sort of longer term negative impact are avoided. And as a minister said, some longer term opportunities are utilized. So off to you.
Yes, thank you so much. And let me first of all thank you for the opportunity to take part in this panel, because everywhere in higher education we are looking for answers, we are looking for the opportunities, and we're looking also for investigating what type of challenges we are facing at the moment. But there are no easy answers, as the minister already said. We face many uncertainties, and that makes policy panels like this necessary and a good way to gather analysis, opinions, and ideas. And congratulations to Georgia for having done what it did, dear Minister. It seems very well done in Georgia. My main challenge, though, is not the quality of education. My main challenge is, what are we societies learning from this crisis? I'm afraid that the reflex will be, let us as soon as possible get back to normal, to what we used to do. But I think that would be a mistake, because I think that our way of life is not sustainable at the moment. So I think that we have to discuss the effects of globalization. We have seen globalization as a natural development, which I think it is indeed. But now we have seen also the risks, the dangers, and the threats. I think that we have to discuss the effects of being dependent on others. Countries that have outsourced, for instance, the production of medical equipment, will have felt their dependence on the goodwill of other countries, and paying enormous sums for simple tools in these medical equipment. I think that we have to discuss the effects of following the Anglo-Saxon economic model. Are markets really always leading? Is shareholders' value the main driver, and should government be restricted as a consequence of that type of economic model? I think we have seen now in these circumstances of the pandemic how important governments are, how much they invest and have to invest in saving and the recovery of the main economic activities. We have also to discuss the effects of reducing public services as healthcare and education, low paid and less respected jobs as cleaners and garbage collectors, for instance. Shouldn't this have to lead to a re-evaluation of the public sector and of public and collective goods? And we have to discuss, I would say, the societal effects. Are we just a collection of individuals looking for maximizing their personal benefits? Or are we a community with empathy, with compassion, and with solidarity? And last but certainly not least, we have to discuss the effect of the xenophobia, as the Secretary General of the United Nations rightly pointed out a few days ago. So I think that these topics should be discussed again in society and also in higher education. The generations that are in university now, and as the Minister rightly said, will be the leaders of tomorrow. They will take the responsible positions and roles in our societies in the next decades. And they should understand the lessons to be taken from this crisis. And of course, there will be financial consequences. We will face a huge recession, leading to growing unemployment and certainly lesser chances for young people, which is devastating, as we have seen during the financial crisis with youth unemployment of 40 to 50% in some Southern European countries. We know that enormous budgets will be needed for economic recovery, and it might lead, and I fear it will be the case in the western parts of Europe, to budget cuts for universities. And of course, there are political consequences as well. The nationalist reflex. I think this crisis has made clear that the main political answer to a crisis from a political point of view is close the borders and protect our own people. So let us hope that this will not become a normal policy instrument, because it shouldn't be. And I think that one of the serious consequences is that we are in a phase of thinking of enemies. Who is the enemy? Who has done this to us? So xenophobia, the conspiracy theories, fake news, anti-globalism, anti-internationalism, anti-multilateralism, all these forces will get stronger. And of course, it will have cultural consequences as well. There might be a lack of cohesion in society. And I think that one of the points of discussion nowadays, and certainly in Western European countries, is the added value of culture is seen less as less value than the added value of other economic sectors. So we are losing out, I think, the importance of culture, maybe of education, and maybe of some other soft parts of the societal sectors. And of course, there are educational consequences. And both have been already addressed by the minister. It's the quality of education. And I agree with him that teachers, governors of universities, researchers has done an enormous task in going over from their classical way of teaching and learning towards this new innovative online teaching and learning with distance learning, certainly as a special field. But also it's the equality of chances and opportunities. And I'm very happy to hear that Georgia has found a solution for that type of problem by this television school or television university, as it might be. And I now, as a grandparent, I can imagine that it would be absolutely brilliant to face new ways of teaching and learning and to learn new things, even by television, looking after my grandchildren, dear minister. So if you could translate the Georgian school to the Dutch school, it would be a great effort. So that's my first, I would say, dear Tamara, it's my first ideas are not about what's the, you might say the challenge for education, but what's the challenge for society? It's a deeper going, I think, deeper going crisis than only educational. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dietrich, for reflecting on post-COVID societal challenges. And truly the question on what kind of community and society will be there post-COVID, community with solidarity, or rather community with lack of cohesion, and of course the role of education, higher education, but also the early school education would be critically important in that. And thank you for praising achievements of Georgia. Dr. Norda, we heard how Dr. Dietrich placed education in the broader picture of challenges of society, economy, and of course there are critical questions for education institutions, financial challenges, political challenges, social challenges, cultural challenges, and we would like to hear your views, how you see our global society, but also specific countries, if you prefer, going about it.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, let me say that I'm very pleased to be participating in this webinar. I was scheduled to be in a workshop in Tbilisi 4 weeks ago, which we had to delay until November. So we are being optimistic, and we hope that in November we will have a chance to have this international workshop in Tbilisi. And the topic of that workshop would be the motivating values and principles for universities. What is the ethical, what is the moral value that a university is driving a university to do its work, to serve its community, and to contribute to its society. So no doubt when we will finally meet in November, we will have a chance to analyze and look back on what we know by then. At the moment, we are still facing lots of uncertainties. I have been in international meetings for the last couple of weeks, almost constantly, and stories from different parts of the world are very different. Some countries are really hit much harder than others. and some countries are facing uncertainties to a much higher degree than others. So we have to realize that the way we live and the way we cope with the challenges and the challenges we are facing now is not always the same in other places in the world. And it might be a factor in what Karl Dietrich just identified as a world where the competition and enmities between countries is stronger and growing rather than the will to collaborate, because disaster is not hitting to the same extent at several places. If you look at the challenges right now, you can in a way describe the challenges in different circles. If you start with schools and universities, of course our first challenge is to safeguard health and to keep to stay able coping with ongoing pressures and uncertainties. I noticed that different people respond in very different ways. There was a questionnaire sent to many students and faculty members in Flanders by the University of Ghent 2 weeks ago. And it registered that quite a high percentage of both faculty members and students find it very hard to cope with standalone teaching and with standalone learning. They miss the structure of their courses. They miss the structure of teamwork with their colleagues. And it's not all of us being able to cope with it in the same manner. At the same time, many students don't find themselves digitally as well connected and as easily operational as others. There are quite a few students that are dropping out, that are losing touch, that cannot be easily found. Same thing with faculty. Some faculty are reporting that they are not the kind of online expert they would like to be, and they wonder if this is lasting any longer, will they stay motivated? But also the wider circle of the institution is facing lots of uncertainties in terms of funding and finance, increasing costs. Yesterday, I was in a meeting where an American colleague reported that the state of Indiana had reduced the budgets for school with the motivation that if you work from home, you have less cost than if you work from your institution. So the authorities do not seem to realize that working from home, working in remote mode is more costly and is requiring more effort than the usual modes of delivery. And last but not least, as Karl Dietrich and the minister already referred to it, we are facing huge challenges as a society. And we are facing them in many, many different ways. But one of the things that have become clear in many countries already is that the vulnerable, socially and economically defined, are extra vulnerable compared to the more or less well-off. This translates into health issues. This translates into unemployment. This translates into access to medical services, access to education. There is a heightened importance of equity, of just societies. And in my second round, I would like to speak to the question how universities might be able to respond to those challenges. I leave it at this for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nord, and definitely on the second round, we will appreciate hearing that from you. And with this, Rector Sharvashidze, you are leading the largest university of the country, and I do remember being ISET, International School of Economics, being part of Tbilisi State University. I do remember those first shocking days when there was obvious that institutions had to close doors to students and move to online regime of delivery of classes. And I was part of the numerous meetings and conversations led by yourself. But it will be very useful for the audience to hear your views on the key challenges this sector and the institutions, as well as probably students, professors, and administrators have faced and are still facing.
Thank you, Tamar. First of all, let me agree with a number of statements made by panelists and colleagues here, that nobody was really anticipating or waiting for COVID to come to our reality. So it was really a shock for educators in different countries. What was firstly done, and it's obvious that we felt two kinds of solidarity in a way. It's an internal solidarity and external solidarity. We had students stuck in Italy, in Spain, in different countries, and we had to work with our colleagues online, with the ministries of education, foreign affairs, in order to get them home. And that was a very pressing need. The second point was to organize courses, online courses in synchronized way and not synchronized way, and that's quite a big challenge for big public universities. We have 22,000 students, and we had to change due to security reasons, cybersecurity reasons, and that was quite and personal information protection, of course. We have changed 22,000 passwords to create new accounts in order to create online courses, online system at our university using different platforms, as rightly Minister mentioned. We're using Moodle, we're using Zoom, we're using Class, we're using Teams, we're using all kinds of things in order to deliver better. And it depends on the discipline, it depends on what is requirement. And the second point is to organize courses for students and for professors as well. And we did so. We had tutorials, we prepared tutorials for all kinds of online resources. But external solidarity also was in a way, and I call it a massification of openness, because those of us who remember the Cape Town Declaration and open educational resources, it was just a very beginning of this idea, and now we're seeing in reality that massively we have online courses, we have free online courses, and we have a lot of resources available for students, for professors, for researchers at different locations. Same to the way, and I'm sure that Seibold will refer when talking about justice and just societies and the role of university, that universities has to play a role in this, and Tbilisi State University did so. We opened up our resources, 12,000 electronic books became available to broader public. And that was the first step that we did. It was quite important to negotiate with authors and to make sure that we're on safe side with all kind of legal requirements, but we did so. And not only that, but counseling, psychological counseling of students that are stuck in remote areas. We had the medical counseling for our students that are in different countries, was coping with international students being in Georgia and was working with them as well. So it's quite a bunch of problems that we faced at our university, but I hope that gradually we solve most of them. The point that we learned so far as well is that what will be next, and here we have quite a problem, of course, as every university around the globe, and it's questions of affordability of education. We are a public university, big public university, and more than half of our students are getting state-paid scholarships. But the rest are, supporting themselves, or families are supporting their tuition fees. What will be the next steps? Of course, we have different measures internally, and we introduce support schemes for those who are in, difficult situation right now. But generally speaking, Georgia is a small country. As every small country, we have problems connected with employability, with high unemployment right now. Most big portion of our income is based on tourism, around 16%, and that's we don't know yet. Of course, we'll do something, I'm sure, but we don't know yet how it will play. And the second part is that the majority or big chunk of our students are receiving support from their parents who are working abroad through remittances. And what it will be, the next step in this direction. What should we do about it? Affordability is a question, equity and equality, of course, big times, and especially for those who are in need. And that's another problem that we're facing right now. But all in all, I would say that generally, it was internal solidarity indeed, and I'm really thankful to all our professors, researchers, and students. They worked as a team and we coped with many problems on our way to move smoothly to fully distance education. And now we're really thinking that we will maintain a big chunk of our experience, and in future to have blended courses, more blended courses, and more courses that are combining distance learning elements with traditional learning and research. And of course, open science. That's a very important issue. And we hope that we'll have more opportunities to collect. On a global and European level, I would rather imagine that we'll have more networking opportunities, because nowadays, probably the landscape of our traditional cooperation, international cooperation, is indeed changing, and mobility, that was physical mobility, is probably no longer available at the same level as it was before. So we have to think about something different here, and how to foster cooperation and probably move some resources, very scarce resources, but still available resources, to something that is focused on developing opportunities at universities, at in-house opportunities. I'm thinking some along the lines of former Tempus TASIS programs, that it's a capacity building, internal capacity building, university capacity building. Those probably would be the next round of thinking how we can really play a role in developing local capacities, because the reality is very severe in this respect. And on a regional level, cooperation, of course, we have to support it through different means, and we think that we'll have an opportunities also here. We're very optimistic in a way, and in traditional way, we're organizing a couple of summer schools, by the way, and we're receiving now feedbacks from our European partners that they're eager and ready to participate in those summer school activities, but we'll see how far we can get there. But indeed, it will take quite a time to become to business as usual. But I agree with, of course, with Carl Dietrich. It will be never the same. We'll live in absolutely new reality, and we'll have to face it. So that would be my first assessment of the situation, and then we'll speak about the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rector Sharvashidze. Never the same could be a very good segue into the second question, but we have one more panelist to reflect. But first of all, let me thank you for reflecting on the issues of today. I think spring has always been a challenging for administrations of the universities, because one academic year is closing, admissions and testing entrance exams period is approaching, and the new academic year is just a few months away. And now in this very particular situation and with post-COVID planning, I think university leaderships are facing a particularly challenging period. Thank you very much. Sebastian Molineus is the World Bank country director in Caucasus, and the World Bank is funding education, supporting education sector development in Georgia with the very large loan-funded project that was approved a couple months ago and has just started a couple months ago. A human capital index is something that the World Bank has been undertaking and has introduced and have been following up. So reflecting on these key activities and being Georgia's partner, Sebastian, how you would reflect on the situation in the education sector and on the challenges of the sector as you see it.
And thank you so much, Tamara, for first of all for inviting me to this very distinguished panel. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about a topic that's very dear to my heart. I also did want to just very briefly congratulate the minister, but really all of the students and faculty here in Georgia for what I find to be really a tremendous response to the COVID crisis, both from a health perspective, a social protection perspective, and an economic perspective, and yes, an education perspective as well. So I think that some of the areas that the minister outlined in terms of Georgia's response in the education sector really have been global best practice. And the minister cited the OECD sort of study, and I think there were even one or two articles from some of the leading institutions in the US that have also sort of cited and lauded Georgia's response to the crisis, including in education. In terms of the challenges to higher education institutions, I would like to sort of highlight 7 broader challenges that I see. And this is perhaps a little bit broader, not only for Georgia, but for higher education institutions globally, or at least in the ECA region. The first one, I think, is related to teaching and learning. I think that we do have some substantial challenges there. So not all academic staff are ready to switch to an online mode of curriculum delivery. Some of that may be related to skill, other maybe, as my predecessor just mentioned, maybe they themselves are not as motivated to use the online platforms that exist. And then another common cause that is cited is the absence of learning materials that are really targeted towards online learning as well. So it's really important to really build on some of the existing online education platforms that exist, so that we can increase connectivity and the ability for teachers and students to connect on this new brave world or online platform as well. Beyond that, there are some important challenges that I've been able to see across the region when it comes to sort of the academic calendar with respect to sort of exams, admissions, and graduation as well. So really there's a lot of uncertainty still around that, and I think some of those dates still have to be properly sort of moved to more of an online mode. So I think that's the first, again, challenge. The second challenge that I would like to highlight is with respect to the digital infrastructure. Unsurprisingly, and as mentioned by many of my fellow panelists, right? So I do think it's important to improve both the utilities as well as the national infrastructure to be able to effectively support continued distance and then blending learning models. I think in Georgia, Georgia really stands well above many of the other countries in the Europe and Central Asia region. However, we have been able to see that there are some challenges in terms of reaching, or digital connectivity, I should say, in some areas, in particular the regions as well. And very fortunately, we do have two World Bank interventions. One was the education project that was cited earlier, both by yourself and then the minister, but also a new project that we're preparing right now called Log in Georgia, in which we aim to connect 700 villages in Georgia's regions to digital infrastructure and broadband access, which will help facilitate, again, access to better education as well, including higher education. So I do believe that it's very, very important that the minister, I'm sure that this has already been taken together with higher education, conduct sort of rapid technology assessments to really pinpoint some of the weaknesses in the infrastructure, and then build on that with World Bank and other development partners support, and then to allocate, really prioritize the funding towards, again, the building of these kind of this digital infrastructure and online platforms. The third challenge that I'd like to highlight is with respect to student mobility. In particular, the sort of internationalization of higher education, and I'm referring to exchange programs such as we have at ISET, obviously, where you have a lot of students from abroad that are currently studying at ISET. And in particular, I foresee some challenges for some of the shorter semester-long exchange programs that exist between many institutions. I think that's something that needs to be looked at very carefully. And I think really there needs to be more flexibility built into sort of the application deadlines to allow this to happen. Visa requirements, I think, is something that needs to be looked at. I know that some countries, I think the Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken, Kazakhstan, Russia, the UK have introduced automatic 3-month visa extensions for students. That may be something to look at here if it hasn't already occurred. And certainly that's something I think that would help facilitate some of that discussion. But I think there will be impact on, again, this internationalization and exchange programs that exist. The fourth challenge is with respect to equity. So I think that given the how can I put it? Given that technology will often favor those from higher income brackets, you could see an increase in inequity and falling behind of students in lower income groups who just cannot afford to purchase laptops or iPads or whatever it is, let alone the necessary bandwidth or internet connectivity. You just need to go a little bit, into some of the areas here, even in Tbilisi, but certainly outside, to see that there are real pockets of poverty and people without any access to internet. So I think this is something that needs to be looked at very, very carefully. Things like social packages for students in vulnerable groups. We need to look at sort of providing high quality internet, as I had provided earlier. Perhaps sort of grants to be able to purchase sort of computers and then the likes as well, or at least lending some of the hardware that is necessary. I think these kind of programs are going to be very critical moving forward to make sure that education can still be there for all. And in Georgia, that has never had an access issue to education, doesn't fall into this trap under this current circumstance. The fifth issue is with respect to staffing. I don't think that this is an issue so much for Georgia, but in a number of other countries, you see that there are a number of university staff that are in precarious sort of contracts, sort of short-term employment, that are being let go. This is happening in the UK as an example, as universities themselves are trying to save money. So this is not an issue yet, at least that's my understanding here in Georgia. But if the crisis is to continue and become more protracted, this could also be something that hits the universities, and so something to be looked at very, very carefully. And we need to have proper communication and retention strategies in place. Furloughing agreements could be one area. There are others as well, but certainly something that needs to be looked at very carefully. Sixth point is with respect to financing, again mentioned to some of my colleagues. The government right now is investing heavily in the economic response to COVID and health, social protection, and now in terms of economic revival. That is the right thing to do. It's absolutely the right thing to do, to invest heavily, act decisively, and this is early lessons from the COVID response. However, at the same time, this probably will in the future mean that there will be shrinking budgets for higher education institutions. I think it's just a question of time until we do pass through the COVID-19 crisis. Governments will have large fiscal deficits that we'll need to manage, and certainly funding will become less constricted. So I think it is really critical, and I think this is going to impact, in particular in Georgia, we have a lot of fragmentation among higher education institutions. Some of those that are less well-funded, that are solely relying on private tuition fees, etc., are going to enter into some challenging times, etc. So I think it's very important that these institutions have immediate discussions with the ministry to identify sort of short-term, 3, 6, 12 months funding strategies on how to move forward. I think this is a great opportunity perhaps for some consolidation within education institutions as well, again, given the fragmentation that currently exists, or at a minimum having partnerships and the likes. So that's something to look at very carefully. And then seventh, and I promise finally, I think that quality assurance is something to look at. Quality assurance has always been an issue, in universities across the world. It is particularly so during these online and remote learning times where the regulatory requirements are insufficient yet. A lot of the internal quality assurance mechanisms that universities have set up are more for the face-to-face rather than remote learning side. So I think this is something to invest in. Perhaps looking at the accreditation, and the re-accreditation of some institutions, that could be something to consider, their ability to respond effectively to online and distance learning as well. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Molineos, and for putting the education sector challenges in the broader context, from fiscal to economic to capacity issues to infrastructure issues. And thanks to the World Bank for supporting the post-crisis economic recovery of the country. With this, I would like to remind participants that they can pose questions through the webinar, Zoom webinar Q&A tool, and we will be receiving more questions for our Q&A session from Facebook. Meanwhile, our administrator will now post a question that all participants can answer. And that will be whether you agree or disagree, and how strongly, that negative impacts of the shock to the education sector caused by the pandemic are outweighed by the eventual opening up of the new frontier by the forced broad integration of digital learning. So a slightly long question, but you will have that on the screen. And please answer, and we will see the reflections at the end of this session. But with this, let me move to the opportunities part of this discussion. You will all agree that there are many indicators, and this is what scholars, practitioners, politicians say, that this crisis is going to transform the higher education. Some of you said it will never be same again. And as a minister said, every crisis brings the opportunity. Indeed. So let's reflect a little bit on those opportunities. For instance, should online classes be seen as a source of broadening the access gap to higher education through a lack of broadband internet access, a lack of hardware, etc., for some students? Or in contrary, this is an opportunity to provide education to more disadvantaged, and the society should look for ways now to do that. So with this broad question on the opportunities, potential opportunities, Mr. Minister, off to you. You are muted, Mr. Minister.
Can you hear me now? Okay, good. So thank you for the question. And first of all, I would like to make it very clear that the extra resources that we are talking about in the post-pandemic period that we will be adding to traditional instruction, things like electronic resources, online distance learning, and so on, these are wonderful as extra resources to complement the in-house actual teaching process that's in the auditorium. The reason I'm saying this is that every one of us that has ever taught, we know that nothing can replace the actual electricity that's present in the auditorium, in the classroom. So the immediate feedback, the live process that comes from human interaction, and the actual dynamic of a lecture or a lab, this is where the magic of teaching and learning takes place, and this will certainly remain to be such. The extra resources, though, especially in 21st century, are greatly helping and enhancing the traditional way of teaching and learning. What I mean by that is that it gives us lots of opportunities to conduct virtual experiments by using electronic resources. Things like electronic textbooks, or simply resources that are available on the web. The opportunity to share the ideas, to see how the similar things are tackled at other universities, to deal with issues where without this, because of the long distance issues, it will be impossible for some professor to visit another university because they're busy at their own home institutions. So there are lots of opportunities that electronic medium and internet provide for us to enhance and build on the system that we already have. There are pedagogical aspects to that as well. For example, in 21st century, it becomes even more clear and more, so to speak, suggested at every level of education to emphasize group work for students, where students can actually learn from one another. When professors assign projects that require group discussions and group effort, so to speak, to come up with a final product, I believe that the online resources where they can have discussions and deliberations, certainly by using online methods, and not only within one country, but one can do international projects where definitely online, gives you the opportunity to develop a research project, for example, whether it's part for students and for researchers as well, by using online sources. It basically makes our very small world even smaller. So that certainly is an advantage for education side as well as for research side. For researchers, they actually have enjoyed the opportunities that the distance communication provides even way before the pandemic started. But of course, since the technology has improved and the proficiency of people they have become better versed in this medium during pandemic. Of course, those skills and this know-how should extend post-pandemic, and I believe together with established, well thought out traditional methods, it will provide tangible and important success results. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. And of course, we wish to Georgian educational institutions and the ministry best of luck in moving into the post-pandemic challenging world. And good to hear from you that online methods and tools will be as a major supplement to the regular face-to-face. And of course, with your long experience as a professor in leading universities in US, you do know the value of face-to-face and classroom atmosphere. Dr. Dietrich, how would you reflect on the opportunities in the education sector? And I think the question we posed is slightly too loud, whether the costs would outweigh the benefits and opportunities in the sector, and your vision about it.
Yes. Let me start that I see, first of all, I see some general opportunities for society more even than for higher education. I would I would hope that in a lot of countries there would be starting redefining the meaning of society as a community and the role of the state again. Shouldn't we redefine what the state is for? Is the concept of welfare state that has been, well, seen as old-fashioned? I think that concept needs new meaning and also needs new incentives. More than ever, we have to relish freedom. It's no longer just an abstract formula, freedom of this and freedom of that, but now the physical lockdown has learned that freedom has a meaning. We know now what we miss after having experienced not to be able to do what we wanted to. So it's just the concept of freedom could get a new meaning for education, for society, but also for students. I think there's a role for politics and for the media in reevaluating the role of experts and of expertise. I don't think that the British Minister Michael Gove will now ever say again, we have had enough of all these experts. Or as common language in certain circles, the expert's opinion is just one opinion and I don't agree. My opinion is as worth as much as those of the experts. And I would ask politics and media, just give a new voice to the experts and accept that they know more than we do in a certain ways. But we have also to be very much aware of conspiracy theories, fake news, the influencing by doubtful or even outright inimical sources. Let's protect our democracy from authoritarian rule and biased information and the suppression of oppositional voices. So the information ability, the information necessity is, I think, crucial for our societies. For education now, of course, we are more innovative than we thought maybe a couple of months ago. I also am amazed and that I'm admired the speed of going over from classical education to the new ways of teaching and learning. We have seen now the potential of these new ways and new tools, like, for instance, gaming. I don't think it will replace the physical classes. I believe in the electricity that the minister mentioned, but it's absolutely is complementary to what we are doing now, the digital learning. So we have to invest in IT infrastructure, and the countries have to invest in the IT infrastructure, including in the super security system. As my former university in Maastricht only experienced a couple of months ago, when their IT system had been hacked and they had to pay quite a sum of ransom to the anonymous hackers. Security is part of it, but also privacy problem is facing us. And now you see students asking, are we sure that by seeing what I'm doing when I make an exam at home, is that the privacy break? Is it loss of my privacy? How are you dealing with it as a university? The professionalization of teachers and learners, both in these new ways of teaching and learning, as Sebastian already said, that's part of personal and professional development. And I've read, to my amazement, a reaction from some Italian labor unions. Online teaching is not in the labor contract of the teachers. So we are not going to do that. That's very strange. I would just opt for more cooperation and development and professionalization in this type of teaching and learning. And we don't have to invent the wheel again, all of us. So we have to look what's going on. How could we help each other in overcoming the problems that we see? A fourth opportunity for me is that the changing economic realities and the arising or the development of new professors might lead to a new and stronger role for higher education in lifelong development. We need the cooperation with the labor market. We need the cooperation with public and state organizations. And we should more invest in short programs. And I think even in micro-credentials. And there could be a more active role for higher education in this sense. The question of quality assurance is part of that, and I come back to that at the end. A fifth opportunity is more appreciation for the serving professions, like healthcare, like education, and like being an official in government, whether it's local, regional, or national, or international. But the serving professions seem to be part of the vital professions in society. And of course, we should stay strongly in favor of international cooperation. You all said physical mobility will at least temporarily be difficult. And international students shouldn't be seen as a business model, as some of our, you might say, UK colleagues, American colleagues, Australian colleagues will suffer immensely from the lack and the loss of their international students. But if you have to pay between $20,000 and $50,000 for education, and if you are losing that as a university, and if you are losing 50, 60, maybe 70% of international students, then you will go to bankruptcy almost. So it's an immense problem to be dependent on the international student as a business model. But still, we have to go on with internationalization. We have to look for good partners, and we have to develop virtual mobility and mobility at home with trusted partners. And that's why I would hope that the countries that are members of the European higher education area could be part of the European Universities Initiative by the EU. And I would strongly hope so, that ministers will be able to convince the European Union to open up this initiative, which is absolutely a brilliant initiative, as far as I'm concerned, open up for all the other countries in the European higher education area. On quality assurance, I see the problem that Sebastian mentioned, but there are two schools in quality assurance. One school says, well, online learning is just part of all the teaching and education that we do. So it's the same rule as for everything in quality assurance. You have to give good education, and you need more infrastructure. You need more professionalism in a certain ways of teaching and learning. But it's part of it, so it should not be a separate part of quality assurance. But other countries say, especially in Spain, oh yes, but we want to have a special quality assurance for online teaching and learning. And they develop their own kind of quality assurance system. I can see the problem now. If you are going over to short programs, and if you are going over to micro-credentials, that there will have to be a kind of a quality assured mechanism. But I would hope, and I would strongly suggest that the universities themselves will be responsible for the quality assurance of those programs that they offer. And if they are short programs and micro-credentials, that they find a mechanism in their house, internally, to internal quality assurance, to assure this type of programs themselves, and that the quality assurance agencies check whether this type of quality assurance that they developed is good enough. So it's not the quality assurance leading. I would say the higher education institutions are leading, and the quality assurance has to follow them and to emphasize their own the responsibility of the universities themselves for the quality for what they are delivering. Last point for research. I agree totally with the rector and with the minister. It's cooperation, cooperation, cooperation. It's cooperation through open science, open access, open data. If we need openness, it's in the field of research. And the research doesn't have borders, can't have borders, and shouldn't have borders. So there, it's just the only thing that we have to do is ask for more cooperation instead of less cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dietrich, for your very interesting views and highlighting some of the critical matters on the critical issues, for instance, the business model relying on international students. Of course, this is perhaps more relevant to British and some other European and US institutions, less for Georgia, but for Georgia as well, because there are quite high number of international students, specifically in certain directions under some certain specialties, and also on for reflecting on opportunities in science and research, and highlighting issue of transparency, opening up of data and science, and having no borders. With this, Dr. Nord, over to you to reflect on the opportunities of the sector. But before you start, let me very quickly report on the question that we posed. Participants responded to the question. There were no extremes, strongly agreeing or strongly disagreeing participants, not surprisingly. The majority, which is about 40%, thinks that the opportunities for the education sector brought by the shock of as a result of pandemic outweighed the costs of negative impacts to the sector. About 30% disagree, and about 20% are undecided, uncertain about it. So I think this is quite fair distribution of sort of philosophical question about post-crisis impacts, challenges and opportunities in the education sector. Dr. Norda.
Thank you very much, Tamara. I'll concentrate on one particular opportunity. Some 20 years ago, a colleague, professor at the University of Amsterdam, in the medical discipline, gave a general lecture to alumni of the university, in which he was speaking about the future of risks in society. And he said there is a lot of talk about climate change, there's a lot of talk about renewable energy and all sorts of challenges, but people often overlook the risk of pandemics. And he was telling us stories about past pandemics, whether they are by viruses or by bacteria, and the number of fatalities. And he was predicting that viruses and bacteria, they become smarter. It's their job to survive. They have been surviving for billions of years, and they will do so. And we will have a hard fight to cope. And I remember that when the lecture was over, people were saying to each other, what a pessimist, what a downer this man. How to spend our Saturday morning on our alumni meeting, listening to this kind of a bleak story about our future. Yet, what he was talking about may not be very welcome, but it is the reality. And the good news is that there are worldwide countless experts who know about these risks, who make inventories of risk potential and make contingency plans how to prevent and how to cope. There are lots of institutes, lots of reports written, and so on and so on. But the not so good news is that most of us do not pay heed to such warning and advice most of the time. We simply do not care as long as emergency is asleep, is away, as long as a calamity is not materializing. We all, at least most of our societies, have just one motto: we will cross that bridge when we get to it. I was reading a report from 2016 from the Global Health Council, and they said the Ebola crisis in West Africa was both a tragedy and a wake-up call. And the wake-up call was, it revealed dangerous deficiencies across global systems to prevent, prepare, and respond to infectious disease crises. And in that report, they demonstrated that the impact of infectious disease crises go far beyond human health alone. And they described in this report, and it's one report out of many, exactly the kind of thing that we see now. To them, what is happening now is the realization of those risks analyses. Yet the interesting thing is that those wake-up calls are statements of experts being discussed in expert conferences, and that we are unable to move that to public knowledge and public policy. Only few exceptions. If I talk to my colleagues in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, and in Singapore, and I ask them how they respond to this pandemic, all of them say, we have learned a lot from SARS and MERS. We were facing the same problems 20 years ago, and we didn't know what to do. And what we do now is working by the script of the early years of this century. So they seem to have learned a lesson. And I hope that universities will pick up a role in making sure that our societies worldwide are now really learning that lesson. We talk a lot about sustainable development goals. You know, since 15, 12 years, this has been a fashionable agenda for universities worldwide. Well, this kind of a crisis is teaching us what sustainability means, what it really requires from societies. And I hope universities as teachers and research communities are taking up that challenge, building up the capacity to really cope with this kind of a crisis and risk, not just now that we are facing a crisis, but also in the meantime, and making sure that our societies know to live with these kind of risks and how to deal with it. Resilience is needed. I'm speaking from my office in the Netherlands. This is 2 meters or 3 meters below sea level. If we had no dikes, I would be swimming. So we have learned over the last 1,000 years to cope with that kind of a situation. Well, this is a kind of a situation that is really a realistic risk for all of us worldwide. This is not about sea level. This is not about drought. This is not about water shortage. This is about a viral or a bacteria infectious disease threat that is realistically a risk all the time. And if we are able as universities to translate our sustainability efforts and our sustainability teaching and research to coping with this kind of thing, getting what the Americans call a pandemic preparedness level that we need, not the kind of language that Donald Trump is using or Bolsonaro, but the kind of language that Angela Merkel is using. She was giving a press conference on the value of science and experts and the need to be resilient and be prepared to these kind of pandemics. Universities can play a role there, and I hope they will take that opportunity. It is a test whether we take that role and have that opportunity to serve our societies or not. Sustainability, truly there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Noorde, for bringing up key issues, key words as sustainability and resilience. And indeed, the reality has shown that resilience is a key word, which is impossible without good risk assessment and planning and preparedness. So clearly that takes us to the whole discussion of challenges. That's the key challenge, the risk assessment and planning and preparedness challenge of many sectors, including education sector. Dr. Sharvashidze, off to you to reflect from institutional perspective of Tbilisi State University or our country.
Thank you. I'll probably continue with Seibolt's point, and I very much agree with the role of unique role of universities, I would say, in spreading knowledge and awareness in society about the issue that we're facing nowadays. Well, in Georgia, we're coping more or less well with COVID so far. And that's probably because of very well structured public health sector, which was abandoned for a while. And now we know again, like in Thailand, we're back to protocols that were in place. And we're really thankful to our professionals and experts that are working in this field. In Georgian newspapers now and media, we're calling them three musketeers. And those are infectionists from Georgia and doctors who are really safeguarding situation here in our country. With all my due respect, the third one, two of them are professors of Tbilisi State University. And I'm really hopeful that this kind of expertise, real expertise, would help us a lot. Secondly, what is happening that our students are working at hospitals from our medical department, and I think that's exactly the place that students should be now, especially future doctors, and they will learn by doing how to avoid in future the epidemics and situations like this. But second point that I wanted to mention, and going back to social responsibility at large. I think that governments should play now a special role to those who are in disadvantaged groups. And I think that vulnerable groups, disadvantaged groups, they really deserve different treatment, affirmative action, if you will, or positive discrimination in a way, in order to really support them in hardships that they are facing. And I think that is also the role of universities to ring a bell and talk about issues like this. And last but not least, I would like also to mention one thing that we are working on special discount rates in our dorms, in tuition waivers, etc. But it's just a very little measures in a way, because we will face a very different scenario starting from September, probably from next semester, not only our university, not only our country, but many countries. And I believe that international students who are losing at large, it will come with a price on it, because it's really, something that we was hoping on. But on another point, I was thinking about organizing some kind of special schemes for those who can afford distance learning, and that's worked perfectly well in some cases. So we're sharing our experience with our colleagues in different countries, with neighboring countries at first, and I hope that we'll come up with some kind of solution, because we have to learn again. We don't know, there's no ready-made solutions. There's no one-size-fits-all situation any longer, and we have to come up with something new, based on our experiences, and just to talk with each other and really network at large. And I think that networking now is of paramount importance for us, be it discipline-based networks, institutional-based networks, and we was talking about quality. And quality, again, is a key in all aspects that we're talking about. We can't compromise on quality of education. We can't do it by default. So we have to work on quality aspect and work hard on it. So I think that avoiding this kind of scenarios, I think that we'll cope with COVID infection, but it's not only pandemic, which is right now. I think that we'll live in really different world. If not COVID, it will be something else, but then we have to learn together how to live and how to cope with all issues that are that we're facing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rector Sharvashidze, for your reflections from institutional perspective and highlighting role of universities in a society, for first of all, distributing knowledge, sharing knowledge, not only to students, but in the society. And of course, the role of Tbilisi State University has been such historically in Georgia, and it will probably continue to be so in this very different era. With this, Mr. Molineos, you gave us integrated view of 7 different challenges that create a system of challenges for education sector, if you wish. How would you reflect on opportunities looking forward? Because we're hearing from participants that clearly the crisis is going to transform the ways we live, the ways we act, the ways we learn. Off to you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question, Tamara. I was fascinated by my fellow panelists' responses to that particular question, and I very much agree with what was said beforehand. So if I take sort of a macro, sort of an overall view, I think that there are 3 critical opportunities, and then by the way, I'll dig down a little bit on some of the opportunities specific to the education sector, but the broader ones, I fully agree, this notion of having a new socioeconomic contract. Rethinking the role of the state, but it's really more than that. It's rethinking, what kind of a contract we want to have. And I think it's very interesting to expose this in some way, or it's being exposed. Where you see in some countries that shall remain unnamed, but they're sort of OECD countries that are making some very terrible trade-offs, if I can be very honest. Right, they're reopening their economies at the expense of some of the vulnerable, right? And full well taking into account that, you could have people that will lose their lives as a consequence of, not protecting their livelihoods and keeping these social distancing norms and measures in place, right? Whereas you have other countries that, and I think Georgia is one of them, that very much has this
Sebastian, we're losing you. Perhaps you could come closer to the microphone. We probably lost 2 sentences. Thank you. The words are very unclear. We just hear the noise, if you wish. So perhaps slightly farther.
Okay, is it better now? Okay, perfect, thank you. So I was just saying there are 3 broader opportunities for change, sort of at the country or macro level. I think number 1 is rethinking the socioeconomic contract that exists, and my predecessor, Professor Dietrich, had mentioned. The second one is digital. Again, many people have mentioned this as well, entering into a digital economy where you look at, putting government services online, digitizing the financial sector with digital financial services or fintech, e-health, such as telemedicine, playing an incredibly important role, and so on and so forth. And then third, I think the big opportunity is the green agenda, the climate agenda. I mean, as much as painful as these social distancing measures have been, if you would walk through Tbilisi just a week or 2 ago, I mean, it was fresh air and clean air, and I saw people riding around on the bicycles, and so all of a sudden you saw a lot more awareness that was coming into this, into the equation, and something to consider as well. Can we build on some of this awareness that is there today? Diving a little bit deeper now into the opportunities in the education sector. So Martin Luther King once said that the goal of education is essentially to have the next generation be able to think critically and intensely, and essentially to build people with or a population of intelligence and character, which has always resounded or made a whole lot of sense to me. And in some ways, this goal is timeless, I believe. At the same time, I think this goal is under particular threat right now for 3 reasons. One, I think the education system has already, before even COVID-19, has been under threat a bit because of the advent of online learning, the wealth of information that is on the internet, and the ability for students to really access information from different sources, not only from the one source like in the old days, which was the teacher. Two, I think that companies are increasingly requiring a different skill set, and there's a bit of a mismatch between what education systems were teaching and what companies were demanding in terms of skill sets. I think this is a second sort of area where education systems were coming a bit under threat. And then third, now of course, this necessary the COVID-19 pandemic, which has forced education institutions to rethink the way that it delivers its education programs. So with those three threats, I see three sort of new opportunities that arise. One, again, is clear and has been mentioned, and I won't spend a lot of time on it to avoid repetition, is on the digitalization of the education system. I think this in particular brings a huge opportunity to tackle inequality that exists across the world, but in many countries. So if we provide the digital infrastructure, if we're able to provide access to computers for all, then I truly believe that we can make a huge impact on the ability to reduce inequality and lift people out of poverty, because you give them economic opportunity and you level the playing field between them and people in cities, etc. So that's one. Two is I think that there's a huge opportunity to really reform education. And I think this COVID-19 response has really gotten people to really think critically in many ways. It has gotten parents have for the first time been forced to really spend time with their children and understanding the way that education works and some of the positives and the negatives it impacts. So I do think that you will have a willingness for a lot of the parents to accept some of the changes, maybe even pushing them. I think you see students themselves that have, believe it or not, regained an appreciation for education and everything that has to offer. I see that with my own 4 children that are actually really looking forward to going back to school and to learning and being with their friends, etc. And then third and finally, I think the educators themselves are finding this to be a challenge, but also they're finding new ways to motivate, students and reaching out and also seeing the opportunities that exist with international cooperation and research, etc. opportunities. So I think that there's a right field for broader reforms and discussions in the education sector. And I hope that this opportunity doesn't fall by the wayside. And then the third opportunity is with respect to sort of the internationalization of education. So to begin with, I think this online and remote learning has really allowed us to see the opportunity in how seamless we can interact with one another digitally as we are doing now. And why not, connect to school, connect schools in Georgia to America or Germany or Vietnam or, across the world. So I do think that there's a big opportunity there. And I also think that the research that is taking place right now, for example, to find a vaccine against COVID-19, I think this international collaboration also is starting to open people's eyes that these online platforms can really help educational institutions really start connecting and also in the field of research. And I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for listing few ways how the situation can create advantages or prospects for broadening up delivery of knowledge to the disadvantaged, but also how the borders can be blurred between, say, institutions, countries in terms of delivering of education. And when you spoke about reforming system of education that was relevant to all countries globally, it's just revisiting how education, how knowledge is transmitted and delivered. So with these dear participants and panelists, we just have 6 minutes left until we close. I will appreciate if we could answer some of the questions posed by participants. I really thank you because I think some of you already answered in writing some of the questions that came from the Zoom participants. Here is the one you may wish to reflect please feel free just to raise hand or just, unmute and answer the question. It is about whether higher education and research in universities will still be attractive for young people down the road in the near future. Any views on that?
That's a very interesting question. I'll try to respond. I think that there is interesting tendency. I believe that the interest towards higher education will increase, not decrease. And that will be my hunch on it. As I'm looking at the numbers, during the last 3 years at our university, at least, we increased intake on 40%. And this year we had no idea about what will happen for future. But now we're seeing that number of students that are willing to become our students, again, they're increasing, and that's a very positive sign for us. I don't know what's chemistry behind it, but in a way, we are really observing that there is a definite interest towards higher education and research, and it should be we have to work on it further. I don't think that in a way we will have, well, it depends again, when we're talking about state universities versus private universities, we have some slight decrease on private sector, and it's understandable because of high tuition fees, etc. It might be one of the explanations to decline in one case and increase in another one. But not only that, I think that interest towards higher education will increase.
I would like to add just one argument. Tbilisi State University recently celebrated its 100th anniversary. And I remember George and I were talking about this, and he told me a story about its beginnings 100 years ago. And I later on talked with a professor of mathematics, and he told me a story about how it had been in his student days in the 50s and 60s. And the lesson from that history is that the university has not grown 100 years by staying the same. It has been reaching the 100 year by constantly changing and innovating. And so the lesson that we can learn from older universities is that reinventing is the normal way of surviving. And we should not be afraid from doing so. We should not be conservative. We should not be just keeping things the way they are as a rule. No, moving forward will make us useful and will even enhance our usefulness in the future.
I would like to chime in actually on this issue as well, and specifically underline the importance of young folks' interest in science. And I believe that this is what's going to happen. One of the lessons that came during this pandemic situation is everybody saw that the way to conquer those challenges that humankind is facing is through science. Science is on the forefront, and the way the issues are going to be solved is through fundamental and applied science. Therefore, I believe that not just because of this example, but because of the galvanizing aspects that this had on scientific community, I believe that having youngsters, young students, and but by that I mean young at heart, because the science knows no age, they will get actively involved on the forefronts of fundamental and applied science. Recently, a couple of weeks ago, UNESCO organized a ministerial conference of ministers of science, and I had the pleasure of participating in this ministerial, and there were ministers of science from all around the world, and we all agreed that the open science and collaboration through scientific efforts, this is the main strategy for all of us to undertake. And this is really wonderful that there was an absolute consensus in that. And I believe that that pertains to the future generations of scientists that are coming up in the pipeline, because this sense of global cooperation among scientists is of absolute paramount importance because for most challenging scientific questions, the only way to conquer them is to combining our intellectual resources, and that's precisely what will happen. Thank you.
Dear panelists, dear participants, it is 4:50 p.m. in Tbilisi, and unfortunately we have to close. On behalf of International School of Economics at Tbilisi State University, I would like to thank particularly honorable panelists for participation, but also all participants on Zoom and Facebook for their active participation. Unfortunately, many of the questions remain unanswered, but I'm sure there will be other opportunities, especially on Georgia, that could be reflected by Mr. Minister and Mr. Rector from media and other sources. Clearly, there are huge challenges. We all share the view that the education sector, as well as many other sectors, economies and societies in general, are facing enormous challenges due to pandemic, but there are lots of opportunities for many sectors, including education, to rethink, to innovate, and push the frontier forward. Thank you very much, and stay healthy and in a good spirit.